Jim Pontolillo, author of The Unknown War of Edward D. Wood, Jr., 1942 to 1946, reached out to me. He asked if I had a copy of Strange Fire by Neil Egri, published by France Books in 1963, as a third of his copy contained upside-down text from another book. I had one and was happy to take pics of the missing pages for him. Here's Jim's latest book that concerns the auteur, director, and pulp author's years after World War II and before going to Hollywood. My copy is on its way. Jim piqued my curiosity. I thought I read Strange Fire some 10 or 15 years before, but the text completely eluded me, so I dug in. I don't want to spoil what Jim's up to, so in a nutshell, here's a bit about the book. It concerns Elmer, aka Wildcat, a drifting biker from the west-south central portion of the U.S., who spends most of the money that he pilfers from his sister on his bike and entry fees on motorcycle races that he never wins and which further break down his bike. The cover and title might have led consumers to think they were getting a book about lesbians, as Strange, Odd, and Twilight are often used for such. For an early adult book, it starts out strong, sizzling even, but then dozens of pages are spent on character development and on a group of bikers led by Ace, whom Wildcat encounters. Turns out the hot time Wildcat had at the beginning of the book was with Ace's girl. One background character, a biker named Romeo, aka Hope Gilmore, is a wink at the actual author of this book. Neil Egri was a pseudonym used by John Gilmore, best known today as a true crime writer of such books as 1994's Severed, the true story of the Black Dahlia murder, and 1997's tell-all Laid Bare, a memory of wrecked lives in the Hollywood death trip. In the latter, Gilmore states that for France Books he wrote 4 books, Strange Fire and Lesbos in Panama as Neil Egri, Dark Obsession as Mort Gillian, and Miss Brutal, which he recalls as Brutal Baby, for which he used the nom de plume Soul Tabor. I would later learn that he also wrote 2 more adult books for Milt Leros's Brandon House in 1966 as J.T. Howard, Hotspot, and The Fourth Sex. This was 2 years after Leros faced multiple obscenity charges along with a handful of others, including France and Epic writers, for distributing what are primarily lesbian-themed books. The father of Gilmore's first wife, Gilmore claims the marriage was illegitimate, which the woman's brother tells me is news to him, likely got the John for Gilmore despite the breakup, as he had been writing for France a year earlier and would eventually pen 7 of the France 75. Said father warrants his own episode. While at France, Gilmore claims he met Ed Wood, whom Gilmore said was also working there. This begat what my late friend Greg Javer called the France Connection and led to the France Revolution. But we never definitively found a novel by Wood. Jim and author W. Paul Appel pitched in on the search. Greg and I doubled down on the claim that one Robert Elkin had made 20 years ago about an anonymous story in a France magazine that he'd sent to me that he claimed Wood wrote. I'd forgotten I'd filed it away for decades. And Greg and I bet our pinkies in a published video that Wood also wrote the anonymous Weird Broad Man for the inaugural Red Garter magazine published under the France banner. But as I've read more Jim Harmon, the latter story could have arguably been his work. Both writers liked old Hollywood cowboy actors, wrote speculative fiction, used ellipses, and both used the pleasurable utterance, They even knew one another, from Laid Bare.
I've read Brutal Baby, Ed told me. Maybe there's a picture in it.
Well, Gilmore's daughter told me in an email that her father was full of baloney, so maybe Gil, as Greg referred to him, made up meeting Wood. Greg thought that was unlikely, Wood not being a star, but Laid Bare was published a couple of years after the Ed Wood biopic. And Wood was dead. There's a lot of that in Gil's writing. For example, James Dean isn't around to confirm he and Gil's messing around in the bedroom. Gil and Wood's handful of encounters couldn't exactly be corroborated by anyone. Do we think Wood actually read Gilmore's Miss Brutal as Gil claimed? However, Gil was spot on about his father-in-law, pseudo or otherwise, being at France, as he was about the editor at France, and that person also warrants his own episode. And Gil, who started as a bit actor on shows like Bonanza, fancied himself a would-be director, which doesn't seem to have ever panned out, but he puts himself in the orbit of crew members and strippers cum actresses that worked with Wood. From John Gilmore in the expanded edition of Cinerama, we sat on the grass in front of a theater on Laurel Canyon and shared a bottle of vino. I didn't like drinking before sundown. For Ed, it didn't make any difference where the sun was. He drained the bottle and smacked his lips, said he was still thirsty and managed to pull himself up. A bullet-nosed Studebaker stopped by the curb, and Criswell stuck his head out of the window. "Ed! Ed!" he called. The rest is so preposterous that I can't even go on. Having just read John Gilmore's L.A. Despair, it should come to no surprise that within the pages of Strange Fire is a dead girl. Jim Pontolillo told me to expect quite the ending with this one. By the way, I found a author at France Books that wrote these Bozo cartoons. More on that later. And interestingly, the VHS from which those Bozo cartoon stills came from were introduced by this fellow. His name is Noel. Ed Wood worked with his father, his namesake, and he also worked with the boy's grandfather. See you next time.